A copy of the schedule will be incorporated into Hansard. I've received a letter from the honourable member for Blaxland proposing that a definite matter of public importance be submitted to the House for discussion, namely the Prime Minister's second-rate NBN and his cuts to innovation undermining the jobs of the future. I call upon all of those members who approve of the proposed discussion to rise in their places, and I call the member for Blaxland.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. In his first press conference as Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull said that he wanted to take the same approach to governing Australia as he had to the NBN. And that statement alone should fill the people of Australia with dread, because there is a myth in this place, perpetuated by Liberal MPs and National Party MPs, that somehow the Prime Minister has fixed the NBN. But that is a myth. It is just a myth, and we exposed some of that in question time today. This afternoon I want to take you through a catalogue of more of the mistakes that the Prime Minister has made on the NBN, the litany of promises that he has broken. The first and the biggest of those is cost. As we learned in question time today, the NBN is now double what the Prime Minister said it would be. He promised before the last election that he could build a second-rate version of the NBN for $29.5 billion. That's now jumped to $56 billion. We got the corporate plan a couple of weeks ago, says it's not $29.5 billion, it's jumped to $56 billion. In other words, it's almost double what the Prime Minister promised. Now, people don't usually get promoted for things like that. You don't get promoted for blowing your budget by 100%, but that's what's happened here. That's what's happened with this Prime Minister. The other big thing that he promised and that he's now broken is that he could build the NBN, a second-rate version of the NBN, by the end of next year. He promised that everyone in Australia would have access to 25 megabits per second by the end of 2016. Now that's blown out as well, and we heard the Prime Minister almost admit that in question time today. Instead of 3 years to give everybody access to the NBN, it'll now be 7 years, Mr Speaker. In other words, the time to build it has more than doubled. So the cost has doubled and the time to build the NBN has more than doubled. There's lots of other mistakes and broken promises. The Prime Minister promised that the rate of return he would deliver on the NBN would be 5.3%. That's now down to as little as 2.7%. He also promised that Australians that have the worst broadband across the country would get the NBN first. The people with the worst broadband would get it first. Now, last week the government released their 3-year rollout plan for the NBN, and that shows the 7.5 million homes and businesses they say will get the NBN in the next 3 years. But what it also reveals is this. There are almost 500,000 homes, 450,000 homes, that have been identified by this government as having the worst broadband in the country that still aren't on the list. That won't get it first. That will get it last. They won't get the NBN by 2018. It's more like 2019 or 2020. It's just broken promise after broken promise, breaking promises like plates at a Greek wedding. And the extraordinary thing here, the extraordinary irony in all of this is that Tony Abbott, the former Prime Minister, broke all these promises, doubled the deficit and got the sack. Malcolm Turnbull, the new Prime Minister, has also broken a raft of promises, doubled the cost of the NBN, doubled the time that it'll take to build it, halved the rate of return on it and more than halved the speed that people will get, and he gets promoted. Now, in question time today, the Prime Minister talked about what's happening in other parts of the world. But what he didn't mention is this. AT&T and Verizon, the two big telcos in the United States, are rolling out more fibre. Verizon, the second biggest telco in the United States, is shutting down their whole copper network and replacing it with fibre. In our region, South Korea, Japan, Singapore, they all have fibre networks. Even across the ditch in New Zealand, they are not rolling out fibre to the node anymore. They're rolling out fibre to the premises. 2 years ago, we were ranked 30th in the world for broadband speed, 30th in the world. We are now ranked 47th in the world for broadband speed. We're behind most of Asia, behind most of Europe, behind the United States and behind Canada. We're even behind Romania, Russia, Slovakia and Poland. They're all ahead of us.
They're all strutting.
They're all ahead of us. Mr Speaker, the world is changing and so are we. We're changing back, though, from fibre to copper. Now, I mentioned the 3-year rollout plan, the 3-year rollout plan that was released on Friday. Now, watch this, Mr Speaker, because this is another broken promise in the making. And to understand why I think this is a broken promise, you just have to look at what it looks like on a graph. If you have a look at this rollout plan, you can see that for the next 12 months it's pretty smooth, pretty low, right up until the next election. And then suddenly it ramps up at this incredible speed, a ramp that Evel Knievel couldn't jump, or Dale Buggins for that matter. Now, to understand exactly how big this ramp is, Mr Speaker, what the government is saying here is that they can deliver the NBN to more than half of Australia in just 2 years. More than half of Australia apparently is going to get the NBN if you vote for Malcolm Turnbull in just 2 years. It's not realistic, it's not achievable, and it's not just me that's saying that. Even the new minister, Mitch Fifield, has described it as ambitious. But more importantly, Ziggy Switkowski, the chairman of NBN, has described it as heroic. This is the financial review from Monday, the 19th of October. National Broadband Network Chairman Ziggy Switkowski's warned that it will take a heroic effort for the project to be made available to more than 11 million homes before 2020. So you've got the minister who says it's ambitious, you've got the chairman who says it's heroic, and leaked documents from the NBN this week show that an internal memo went round to staff last week saying they're already behind schedule. And they haven't hit the ramp up yet. They haven't even hit the ramp up yet. And remember, Mr Speaker, that all of this depends on copper, the state of the copper. And as the corporate plan revealed only a couple of weeks ago, on page 51, they still don't know what the quality of the copper is. Page 51 says the quality of this network is not fully known. So they've bought back the old copper network that John Howard sold last century, and they still don't know how bad it is. And they call this due diligence. And worse than that, Mr Speaker, contractors I've spoken to, asking how bad the copper network is, have told me that NBN's working assumption is that 10% of the copper pairs in the fibre-to-the-node areas will need to be fixed. But in places like Newcastle and the Central Coast, it's closer to 90% of the copper pairs that have needed work. And in some places, the copper is that bad that they've had to replace old copper with new copper. One contractor told me that in Newcastle and the Central Coast, 10 to 15% of the copper lines are having lengths replaced. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg, because as we found out in estimates last night, NBN's ordered more copper. They've ordered 1.8 million metres of copper, or to put it another way, 1,800 kilometres of copper. Enough copper to connect Australia to New Zealand. Now, the Prime Minister says that John Key, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, is his role model. But what's John Key doing? He's not rolling out fibre to the node, he's not rolling out more copper, he's rolling out fibre to the premises. And what are we doing? We're going back to the node. Back to the node. Now, Hollywood couldn't have written a script like this. We've been told it's back to the future day to day, the day Michael J. Fox's character Marty McFly lands in the future, the 21st of October 2015. And what did Hollywood imagine he would find? Flying cars, flying skateboards. And what have we got instead? A government that is buying almost 2,000 kilometres of copper. It is a myth, Mr Speaker, to assume this Prime Minister has fixed the NBN. He didn't become Prime Minister because of what he has done on the NBN. He became Prime Minister in spite of it. He has doubled the cost of doubled what he said it would cost, doubled the time it would take, halved the internal rate of return on this project as well, and now we find out that he's bought almost 2,000 kilometres worth of copper. It is just appalling. The idea that he has fixed the NBN is just a myth.
I call the Minister for Territories, Local Government and Major Projects.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The relevant movie I'd suggest is not Back to the Future but Groundhog Day, because we seem to consistently have the shadow minister having the chutzpah to stand up here being the man from the party which produced a car crash when it came to the NBN, and he's like the man at the car crash who is berating the emergency services when they turn up to fix it for not fixing it quickly enough. Let's be clear, the reason that the NBN presented a policy challenge to an incoming Abbott and now Turnbull government is because we inherited one of the most disastrous pieces of public policy execution in the history of the Commonwealth. Let's just remind ourselves of a few key facts to demonstrate the first proposition I want to articulate this afternoon, which was that Labor's NBN under the Rudd government was hopelessly mismanaged, hopelessly poorly planned. We had a sweeping but ill-conceived promise from Messrs Rudd, Conroy, Tanner and Swan in April 2009. It was going to be a 100 megabit per second network, and it was going to cost $43 billion. And apparently, according to the then Prime Minister, it was going to be such a great investment they were going to fund it through Aussie infrastructure bonds, and he urged mums and dads to go out and invest in these bonds, one of the most woefully inappropriate and negligent pieces of financial advice that has ever been given. We were told at the time that there was still going to be substantial private sector investment. We then, of course, had the implementation study commissioned from McKinsey and KPMG, who came back nearly a year later. Their report was released the Sunday before the budget, so in an attempt to disguise it from public scrutiny, and that report said there is no prospect of the private sector touching this with a barge pole, and it suddenly turned out that the Commonwealth was going to have to pay for the whole thing. And what did they achieve by the time they left government in September 2013, Mr Deputy Speaker? A woeful performance. After 4.5 years, how many Australians were in a position to connect to the NBN should they choose to do so? Barely over 300,000 premises after 4.5 years. So Labor flailed around in the most incompetent and disorganised fashion when it came to the NBN. There was virtually nobody on the board who had any experience of the telecommunications sector and private industry, and don't even ask the question of whether there was anybody in the Labor Party who had any experience of the private sector and the telecommunications industry, because that would be a futile quest. What we have had from Labor has been an incompetent execution, and of course the challenge for the incoming Minister for Communications, now the Prime Minister, was to turn that around and turn it into a credible, deliverable, executable, achievable plan, deliver on the rollout and start to get Australians connected to the NBN. And the then Minister for Communications, the current Prime Minister, has done a magnificent job in dealing with that challenge. I mentioned before that barely over 300,000 premises could be connected after 4.5 years. By the way, they'd managed to spend over $6 billion of public money during that period. There is nobody to compare to the Labor Party when it comes to vaporising public money at very rapid speed. What have we done? In 2 years, the number of premises that can now connect is 1.32 million, nearly 4 times as many in 2 years after Labor got to the frankly pathetic number of just over 300,000 in 4.5 years. It really is frankly a mystery why they thought it was a good idea to even bring this issue up in an MPI debate today, Mr Speaker. And of course we are not stopping at 1.2 million because there is an ambitious target of getting to 12 million premises which need to be able to connect. And we are quite frank and open with the Australian people about the scale of the challenge. On the opposite side of the chamber, they seem to think it's somehow curious that we should be honest and open with the Australian people that this is an extremely challenging infrastructure project. But it is, and we are seeking to be very open and transparent about that. Every week the rollout numbers are published on the company's website, something that we never saw from the previous government. Their principal interest in the NBN was in securing photo opportunities, and they certainly generated a lot of those, but substantial, tangible and measurable performance demonstrated in what was published on the company's website was nowhere to be seen. By contrast, we have announced last Friday a credible 3-year rollout plan under which by mid-2018 some 7.5 million premises around Australia will either be able to connect or will be in an area where construction has commenced. Now, that is a plan which has been developed by an experienced board, experienced management, and of course we very largely changed out both board and management to make sure we had capable, competent, experienced people, something bizarrely Labor never thought to do when they were in government. And we are getting on with the job of delivering the national broadband network. Let me make this critical point as I come to the third theme I want to mention this afternoon, which is the increasingly hysterical claims we are now getting from the Shadow Minister. We've got, for example, this hysterical claim that there's some kind of problem with the copper because NBN has purchased $14 million worth of copper from its supplier Prismium. Let me explain some basics about how a telecommunications network works. There are pillars along the street all around suburban Australia. We are going to install what are called nodes, and those are going to be near but not exactly next to the pillars. Therefore, there needs to be a copper connection from the pillar to the node. That is how a fibre-to-the-node network works. That is how a fibre-to-the-node network has always worked. You need to make sure there is a copper connection between the existing pillar and the new node. When you work out the many thousands of nodes around Australia that need to be connected to the many thousands of pillars, it turns out that's quite a bit of copper. And NBN is buying that copper as part of the ordinary job of delivering this network consistent with the plan that we have carefully developed and explained to the Australian people. But let's turn to the even more extraordinary and frankly ludicrous claim from the Shadow Minister that what we need to do is return to a plan under which NBN will be fibre all the way. His quote, October 14, "If you vote for the Labor Party at the next election, you will be voting for more fibre." What an interesting suggestion. And how has that been received by industry participants? What did the chief executive of one of the major telcos in Australia, M2, have to say about that? He said, quotes, "I think any further change in the deployment model would be ill-advised. I wouldn't advocate for any change." That's the industry, Mr Speaker. That's not politicians. That is industry participants in the telecommunications sector. What did the Australian Financial Review have to say about this brilliant new idea from the Shadow Minister? The Australian Financial Review had this to say, quotes, "Labor has no credibility in this area. The NBN, as conceived under Rudd Labor, turned an important piece of national infrastructure, running to a sensible timetable, into a Kevin Rudd vanity project with no real idea of the costs that ran to a political schedule. It went from $4.7 billion in 2007 to $42 billion in 2009 to at least $56 billion today. A lack of considered detail bedevilled the NBN under Labor. The fact the party doesn't want to give any details about its new plan, or more accurately a reinstatement of the old NBN, and not talk about the cost, makes this policy look like the last and expensive joke." So it would seem that the new idea from the Shadow Minister about how Labor is going to deal with the NBN has not been well received by informed stakeholders. And the answer and the reason for that is pretty obvious, because while the Shadow Minister presumed to stand up and complain about the cost of the NBN that the coalition is now rolling out. He neglected to mention that the cause of that was the chaotic basis on which Labor first introduced the NBN, which we've been left to fix up. He also neglected to acknowledge the obvious point that his plan is going to cost at least $30 billion more. So if your objection is the cost of the plan, you now stand up and say, we are proposing to spend at least $30 billion more. That is clearly inconsistent. And what about the fact, Mr Deputy Speaker, that his plan is going to take 6 to 8 years more to get the NBN rolled out to Australians? Mr Deputy Speaker, the Turnbull government is getting on with the hard work of delivering an NBN. We don't say it's easy, but we've got a credible plan. What we have is deluded fantasy from the opposition.
Thank the honourable member. Minister, and I call the honourable member for Chifley.
Fanciful, Minister. I mean, he on the one hand complains that they don't have any details of the plan, yet he can speak with some confidence that it's going to take longer and cost more. He has no idea about what he's talking about. He has absolutely no basis to make those claims, but he puts it forward because that is all they are used to doing, making up stuff about the NBN. You had, for instance, the Prime Minister today claiming, for example, when it came to the NBN, we wanted to think about a different way. We wanted to come up with a better plan. We wanted to come up with a different technological solution. No. What they realised was this, that after they had a track record of 19 failed plans and they saw the way that the public embraced the notion of finally getting a broadband network that would work for them regardless of if they were in the city or in the region, they realised, the coalition realised, that they had to cuddle up to the NBN. They had to seem like they were supporting the NBN. They finally recognised they could not destroy it in the way that Tony Abbott wanted to. They had to make out like they were the friend of the NBN. And so what did they do? The Prime Minister did what he does best. He white-anted. He white-anted the NBN. He made all sorts of claims that he would be able to deliver the NBN better than anyone else, that he could deliver it faster, that he could deliver it cheaper, that he could deliver it more efficiently. He is the fibre Svengali, the Rasputin of the rollout, because when you look at every claim, the sweet promises he made before the election, where are they at? Where are they at? He said, for example, 25 megabits per second by 2016. Did he do that? No. Did he do that? Nope. Nope. He did not, and it only took him a short space of time to announce that he couldn't do it. So he said he'd deliver 25 megabits per second by 2016. Did he do it? No. He said he'd do it cheaper. Did he do it? No. He said he'd do it faster. He'd deliver it to us quicker. Did he do it? No. Member for Solomon complains. Member for Solomon, you are the beneficiary of Labor's NBN. You have more premises, Member for Solomon, that have fibre to the premises courtesy of Labor than what other Liberal electorates will get. There are more Liberal electorates that will fail to get the quality of service that your constituents got courtesy of Labor because of your defunct plan. So don't interject on us. You should go to your colleagues and explain to them why they are getting a lesser service than what you're getting. So don't pipe up here and say that. And by the way, after that terrific track record, failed to deliver the speed, failed to deliver it cheaper, failed to deliver it on time. Look at the quotes that are coming in. I'll read this one. So, what has Turnbull, this is a quote, Deputy Speaker, so what has Turnbull yet done that should give a Conservative heart? Sure, he's promising competent economic management, but after the hash he's made of the national broadband network, now even more expensive and more delay, I need more than a wink and a nod.
Who said that?
I wonder who said that?
Who said that?
Andrew Bolt. Even your own, condemned by your own over your management of the national broadband network. What a disgrace that you can't even, that they are holding up the Prime Minister's mismanagement of the NBN as a sign of things to come, and they are right. And so what's his answer? So now that the project is being delivered more expensive, slower, failing to deliver the speeds, what's his answer? He's looking when other countries are confronted with the notion of how do we modernise our broadband network, we'll use copper, said no country ever. No country ever. I mean, Singapore, fibre. South Korea, fibre. Japan, fibre. Hong Kong, fibre. New Zealand, fibre. What are we doing? Buying 1,800 kilometres of copper. I know you've discovered startups now, but I didn't think you were resuscitating the copper art franchise. I mean, 1,800 kilometres of copper is your answer to modernising the network. You are a joke. People know you're a joke. You are reverting back to form. You're reverting back to form, stuffing up broadband like you did the last time you were in government, 19 failed plans, making a mess. But the problem is people in the community pay, the nation will pay. You say you're about innovation, yet you've deformed the very platform infrastructure required for people to drive innovation in this country, but you're pretending to be the friend of broadband. It is a disgrace.
Thank the honourable member for Chifley and call the honourable member for Mallee.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to talk about the Prime Minister's first-rate NBN and the innovative and jobs for the future, because it was quite evident in question time that they were bowling the underarm bowl and he was smashing them for a six every time, because never before have we actually had a Prime Minister who understands how to build a national broadband network like Malcolm Turnbull. We're very blessed with his full knowledge of this project. You know, regional Australians are innovative and we need improving communications. Investment in communications does drive productivity, so they're right on that. Productivity in country towns. And if there's something I know about country people is that they really are innovative and they really stand to benefit from communications technology. Of course, the challenge was there were only 5 towns in the whole of the electorate of Mallee that were flagged to get anything under the Labor's NBN. Only 5, because their initial rollout had towns of under 500 premises getting nothing, squid, zip, nothing at all, nothing at all. And so you want to talk about rolling out an innovation and talk about things that are going to benefit it. 5 towns in a third of the state of Victoria were going to get it. And then the 5 that were flagged to get it, they had to wait for a little while. To wait for a while. How long? You know? Well, they were waiting. They were promised it. They were promised it. It was coming. It was coming. And yeah, you know, it reminded me of when I was on a date once. I was on a date when I was a young man, and I will admit into the federal parliament that I was sat there and the girl was coming. She was coming. She was going to come to the dinner, and I was sitting there and I was waiting, and I was all in anticipation because I had a hot date, and it didn't come. It didn't come to the fruition. And I sat there, and it was like the towns in my electorate. They were waiting, and they were seeing the press releases, but they weren't seeing the build. And then they got a song. What was the song? The song that became famous was the song that became the motto for the Labor NBN broadband. I think it was a little less conversation, a little more action, please. I think that was a little less conversation, a little bit more action. I won't sing it because I'll be doing a disservice to the parliament and I'll probably be asked to leave. But that was the thing that defined what Labor did under the NBN, and by what we're trying to do is there was a little bit more too much conversation and no more action. And what we are trying to do is try and build it. And that's what we're doing. If you look across the electorate of Mallee, we are building it. You know, we're not just about ideas, we're about administration. And I think that's ultimately what separates people on our side of the parliament from the other side of the parliament. It's a great thing to have an idea. Don't miss an idea. But it is quite another thing to turn an idea into a reality. And that's what we've got under Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister. That's what we had under Malcolm Turnbull as Communications Minister. That's what we've got under Paul Fletcher and his portfolio. Capable people who understand what it is to turn an idea into a reality. And let's have a look at the reality. Remember, there was only going to be 5 towns under the Labor NBN that were going to get it. And these are the ones who have got it now. Pomonal, Quantong, Rainbow, Rapanyup, St Arnaud, Stawell, Warwicknabeal, Watcham, Witcherproof, Kahuna, Culwa, Halls Gap, Kundrook have got the NBN now. Let's have a look at some of the others that are coming. Charlton, Baronga, Cabarita, Golgoa, Rimple, Merbeen, Mildura, Nil, Euston, Robinvale, Swan Hill, Kahuna, Redcliffs, Horsham, Dimboola, Donald, Warwicknabeal, St Arnaud, Oyen, Kerrang, Stawell, Edenhope, These are the ones who are there, and these are going to be switched on in the next 12 months. This is going ahead. So if you want to compare what is reality to what is a dream, we are delivering the NBN. We are delivering it. Let me name a few more. Kerrang, Kundruk, Tagau, Robinvale again, Coldross, Irimple, Merbeen South, Mildura East, Nangelock, Redcliffe South. The list goes on. We were only going to get 5. Now we're going to have 48,000 houses across the electorate of Mallee. They're going to have NBN. The rest are going to have satellite. We are delivering it. If you vote Labor, you'll wait longer. If you vote Labor, you'll pay more. If you vote Labor, you won't get any coverage in regional Victoria, and certainly not in Mallee. We're the ones who are delivering it. A little less conversation, a little more action, please, is what the electorate asked for, and that's exactly what they're getting under the Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull in delivering this program, and they know it, and that's why you guys are in a whole world of trouble when the next election comes your way.
I thank the honourable member for Mallee. Order, and I call the honourable member for Perth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, we heard some great words of wisdom from Joe Hockey today, and he acknowledged the quality of the NBN. He said that this was a great plan that Labor had introduced. Now, he didn't go on and explain what happened next, and that was that Malcolm Turnbull recognised that it was a great plan as well. But in order to get it through the Luddite, the former Prime Minister, then Leader of the Opposition, he had to produce NBN Lite. He had to produce a dumbed-down 20th century vision. Totally rejected, as said, around the world in order to get something up. And then he went to that last election. This is what I want to focus on. He went to that last election promising, as my colleagues have set out before about the cost, couldn't deliver the cost, promised he'd have it all in by 2016, can't even really get a substantial amount of this dumbed-down version rolled out by then, as our Shadow Minister has demonstrated so clearly. But what he also promised, and this is what I want to focus, he also promised that he was going to be introducing this according to need, that those suburbs and towns and regions that had the lowest speeds, the lowest capacity would be the ones that would get this rolled out. Well, I can tell you that has been absolutely and utterly betrayed in my electorate. We've been following this very, very closely because we have such diabolically low speeds, even though we are relatively an inner city seat. And we have been looking at the broadband, those speeds that we see on my broadband, but even taking those speeds on my broadband, which according to our surveys actually overstate for many of our suburbs what the real performance is. But we've got suburbs like Bedford that get 7.45 megabits per second. That's a D on the My Broadband scale. We've got Bayswater, which is less, also a D. We've got Naranda, another D. And right down the bottom is Embleton at 2.85 megabytes. That's an E. Now, did any of these suburbs get included in the rollout that we are seeing that was announced last week? Not one of those suburbs was included, but let's actually have a look at some of the WA suburbs that were included on the rollout plan. So we've got Sorrento, which struggles by on 21.25 megabits per second with an A rating. They're getting it. We've got Alfred Cove that's got an A rating. They're getting it. Waterman's Bay, they've got an A, but they're getting it as well. And we've got poor old Peppermint Grove, struggling suburb, that's getting a B. Swanbourne's getting a B. And they're getting theirs rolled out over the next 2 years. Now, it just so happens, what is the defining characteristic of all those A and B suburbs? They happen to be in electorates occupied by the blue team. Now, this is not the politics of envy. This is about the Prime Minister keeping his product his promise to get the NBN to those suburbs that need it first. It's about being fair and not using a ministerial whiteboard to carve up the pie. Now, I do ask myself, is there another reason other than the electoral fix? And I suspect there could be, because the foundation myth of Turnbullistan, the myth that we've heard about today, that all Telstra's copper is shiny and bright, will be exposed absolutely if we went into any of those suburbs to attempt, all of those D&E suburbs, to attempt to deliver broadband, because we know they can't even deliver voice services when it rains. This is the copper network that Telstra manager Tony Warren said back in 2003 that was at 5 minutes to midnight. This is the reality of our copper, that for nearly over a decade ago it was on its last legs, and now we're pretending that it is going to be able to deliver 21st century download and upload speeds. We know it's not, and that is why you are avoiding so many of those areas that have the lowest speeds in this nation.
I thank the honourable member for Perth, and I call the honourable member for Page.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Look, the NBN has had a colourful history, and we all know that. And one of the colours that comes to my mind, Deputy Speaker, is the colour of red. And I say that because we know that the former minister in the former Labor government, Stephen Conroy, who had responsibility for NBN at one stage, said that all television executives would wear red underpants on their head if he told them to. So I don't know what a psychoanalyst or a Sigmund Freud analyst would say about that. I don't know what underpants on heads mean, if you use that as an analogy. Don't know what the colour red means either, but it certainly explains some thinking about the way he'd planned and designed the NBN from its outset, which caused this government great headaches when the now Prime Minister took over the department, because obviously everyone in this country wants NBN, everyone in this country wants fast broadband. It's important, as everyone says, for our technological advancement, for our advancement as a commercial nation, and everyone is in agreement for that. But obviously what he did from the very start, and we remember this, we remember that he had this thought about this process, and with Kevin Rudd, and God help us, with Kevin Rudd and Stephen Conroy sitting on a plane with a beer coaster defining and designing a program. And we've seen the whole problem that's how the initial start of this was. So what was the problem right from the start? Well, the problem from the start was who should really deliver this. Because obviously if you could go back from scratch, and the now Prime Minister has said this, if you go back to scratch, what you would do is you would tender this to the private enterprise. You would tender this to telecommunications companies, to companies who look at this and do this and would do it in a cost-efficient way. And then what would happen is the government, as we should, would step in and cover areas and regions that weren't commercially viable. And if it had been done like that, which is in most countries around the world, Deputy Speaker, most countries around the world have done exactly that. But no, the man who said television executives should put red underpants on their head had another thought process, and he thought that the whole government should run and design the whole thing. Now, when we took it over, when the now Prime Minister took it over as the Minister, as he said, it was complete chaos. And he has obviously cleaned up the whole department and got NBN running on the best commercial footing that he can. And what's that mean? Well, that means we've seen just last Friday the results of that coming to fruition as well, because my region and the Northern Rivers of New South Wales, Deputy Speaker, are very excited because this program is running out into 2020. Already around 10,000 premises in my region have access or can have access to it via the wireless system, and many of them have already connected, which they're very excited about. But then also around 2017, all my major regional centres will be having fibre to the node connected. Now, obviously, again, if you had fibre to the premise, you would get faster speeds, and no one denies that. But again, as a government that's always, as a coalition government that always looks at the taxpayer money and wants to be as prudent as we can, we're basically going to give a system that's going to run at about 80 to 85% of the speed for about 40% of the cost. So, you know, that's a good deal. And for the vast majority, if not all businesses and retail and households, they're going to be happy with those speeds. But, you know, as we know, drunken sailors over there, money's never a problem, just spend it because it's not theirs. So they don't take into account that commercial or financial reality. But just back to my community, Deputy Speaker, I know and been speaking to people this week from locations such as Alstonville and Wallingbar, which are going to be connected in early 2017 with fibre to the node, and Evans Head, Coracai, very excited. I was down there earlier last weekend and they're very happy. Lismore, Ballina, Grafton, all being connected in around the 2017. And what's very exciting for us is fibre to the node works. It works for them. The cost is cheaper already with some major businesses and some local council operatives and some of my state government colleagues. We have a Pacific Highway going through as well, another major part of infrastructure, and already we are looking to attract and we will be going far and wide around the country to attract businesses to live and work in our region once this is connected. We can now plan this because people will now know when this is going to be connected. And as you know, Deputy Speaker, just up the road, you know that the Northern Rivers is the most delightful place to live and work in the country. So we are going to be attracting more businesses to our region because of this. And thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I thank the honourable member for Page and I call the honourable member for Newcastle.
And thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, the story of the NBN in the City of Newcastle couldn't be more different from the representations from members opposite today. I've pinched myself on a few occasions throughout this debate just to see whether I was in the same parallel, whether we were operating on parallel universes or not. But you know, the City of Newcastle, my electorate of Newcastle, under the Labor government, was looking forward to every home and every business being connected to fibre to the premise. That was the promise under Labor. By the end of next year, that would have been delivered. Every home and every business underway. But no, we've got to change of government. Malcolm Turnbull comes forward as our communications minister. And although John Key and Malcolm Turnbull, think they're kind of besties now after the long weekend, kind of sleepover, we've got to see their visions for the future could not be further apart. Even New Zealand, as we've heard, has long woken up to the fact that fibre to the premise is the way to go. So, I can understand why members opposite are feeling somewhat confused and a little disorientated in this debate because, they've got a Prime Minister who it was, of course, the Minister for Communications for the couple of years that we're referring to. Now Prime Minister, he spent a couple of years trying to claw his way back onto that job, finally gets there, declares, I'm running a 21st century government here. I'm running a 21st century government here. Just forgot to mention utterly relying on 19th century technology. So, we've got the 21st century government running with 19th century technology, trying to convince us all that all is well. Well, that's not going down too well in my electorate, and I'm pretty sure it's not going down too well in many electorates across Australia. Right. I mean, who would have thought when the Prime Minister said he was interested in innovation, jobs of the future, that suddenly coppersmiths would suddenly be back as a main job of the future? The fact that you have areas of a city like Newcastle, the second oldest city in Australia, it is that there are areas of my electorate less than 30 minutes from the CBD that have no access to broadband services whatsoever. Okay? Can't even get an ADSL connection. That this government said, as the member for Perth pointed out quite succinctly, that there was to be a priority to areas that had poor quality, poor service. But those areas of my electorate had to mount massive community campaigns to even get this now Prime Minister to listen to the needs of their community, to get them added back onto a map that they used to be on, that they actually were already part of and were getting, the real NBN. They had to claw their way back onto this new map of, to get the second-rate NBN, and are expected to be somewhat grateful for that nonetheless. Well, people do want access to high-speed broadband. There's absolutely no doubt about that. People understand very clearly that it is an enabler in our communities. It is the future for so many of the jobs, but it's also, right now, integral to school education, to people's workplaces. I've told this story on many occasions, but I have got residents in the suburb of Thornton, one woman who is an aged care nurse, who has to put a dongle into her laptop to climb onto the roof of her house to download the roster to find out what shift she's working on. Anybody that thinks that is an okay system, and she's in an area that's only recently been re-added onto the map, so she's still got quite a way to wait before she's got any hope of seeing NBN delivered into her region. Small businesses in my electorate, one of which has relocated to the Central Coast to get access to the big pipe. Another geologists in my region who do work for the mining companies, they actually have to load their maps onto USB and drive 2.5 hours to the mine site because we do not have the technology to be able to deliver that. Anybody that thinks that is acceptable is living in an unreal world.
And I call the honourable member for Solomon.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And the NBN is being delivered under the current coalition government, despite inheriting Labor's mismanaged and appalling track record on the NBN. And we've heard these guys over there skiting about their achievements, but the fact is, Mr Deputy Speaker, under Labor, around $6.5 billion was spent to deliver broadband to 2% of the premises. And at the last election, only 260,000 premises in fixed-line areas were passed by the NBN. And today, that figure, Mr Deputy Speaker, is more than 1 million premises that can access the NBN in a fixed-line serviced area. So under Labor, there was only 51,000 users who were on fixed-line and fixed-line wireless networks. Well, today, Mr Deputy Speaker, there are more than 570,000 fixed-line subscribers. So an analysis of all all fibre models showed that under Labor, the NBN would not be finished until 2026 at the earliest, with peak funding to cost around $74 billion and $84 billion. This is just reckless and a gross mismanagement of taxpayer money. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, some of my colleagues have already pointed this fact out, that under an editorial recently in the Australian Financial Review said that Labor had no credibility in this area, and that then they further described Labor's plan for the NBN as a very expensive joke. A very expensive joke indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker. So Labor's expensive joke would leave millions of Australians stranded with very poor, and we've heard some of those on that side saying that they've got poor NBN, but they've also, and Mr Deputy Speaker, that they were saying they have no broadband for more than a decade. Well, I'm sure that you will agree, Mr Deputy Speaker, that's pretty disastrous in the middle of a technological revolution. So innovation and the ability to prosper in the digital economy would suffer under Labor. This is completely and utterly unacceptable, and I'm glad that at the last election Labor's expensive joke was destroyed. So now, in contrast, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Coalition's plan brought to the table, the NBN remains on track to be completed in 2020. This is 6 to 8 years shorter and $30 billion less than what was proposed under Labor. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is by no means second-rate, as they suggest opposite. This is just how you run economically responsible government, and there's no compromise on quality. Under the Coalition Government's plan, we make use of the existing copper and cable infrastructure running into homes, and why wouldn't you? This method means that the NBN can be completed far sooner and for far less money to taxpayers. And as I've said previously, the Coalition is on track and has estimated that the NBN will be accessible or have constructed underway to 72,000 homes and businesses by September 2018. I'd like to give a couple of examples from my electorate, Mr Deputy Speaker, and the NBN is well and truly underway, and my constituents are very happy and they're very excited about the prospects and of the completion and being connected. So as of the 2nd of October 2015, we have 37,248 premises ready for service. We have 30,354 premises that are serviceable, and we have 12,646 premises that have been activated across Alloa, across Anula, Bayview, Brinken, Casuarina, Darwin City, Driver, Durack, East Arm, East Point, Eaton, Fanny Bay, Jingley, Karama, Larrakia, Leanya, Ludmilla, Lyons, Malac, Marlow Lagoon, Marara, Moyle, Nakara, Parap, Rosebery, Stewart Park, The Gardens, The Narrows, Tiwi, Virginia, Wagaman, Wanguri, Woolna, Wallagi and Yarrawonga. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, there are 10,400 premises where build is underway, coming across areas such as Bakewell, Berrima, Coconut Grove, Coonawarra, Hidden Valley, Holtz, Nucky's Lagoon, Milner, Nightcliff, Pinelands, Rapid Creek, Rosebery and Winnelly. So those who are already reaping the benefits of their NBN connections have told me of their experiences. For example, Vanessa from Bayview told me about the ease of which NBN was connected to her house. She said 3 weeks she was in the Telstra store, and at the end of that 3 weeks she had NBN connected.
Expired. I thank the honourable member for Solomon. I call the honourable member for Hotham.
Well, Deputy Speaker, it's with some envy, to be honest, that I hear these stories from the other side of the chamber about the lavish impact that the NBN is having on households in their electorate, because the story of my electorate, like the member for Newcastle has described, could not be more different. Deputy Speaker, I want to tell you about a constituent of mine named David, who contacted me in a state of extreme agitation about 6 months ago. This person is a father of two, he's an IT professional, and he had just moved into a house in Heatherton. He was having trouble with internet connectivity, Deputy Speaker. He wasn't complaining because he didn't have access to super-fast broadband or the NBN. He wasn't complaining because he didn't have access to ADSL 2+. He was complaining because he didn't have internet access at all. This is an IT professional with two children who are at school, for whom internet is a critical part of their education. And this is a person who doesn't live in a remote area of the country. This is not someone located in the middle of the desert. This is someone that lives right in the heart of the second biggest city in this country. So what we have, Deputy Speaker, is a major problem on our hands. And I'm glad the member for Solomon is happy with what's happened with her electorate. I would point out that most of the work that is connecting her constituents to the National Broadband Network happened under Labor. In the 2 years that the Coalition has been in government, not a single additional person has been connected to NBN in the seat of Hotham. The only people who are connected to the NBN is a small section of Springvale South, and that group of people were connected to the NBN under a Labor government, Deputy Speaker. Now, Deputy Speaker, it's not just individuals in my electorate that are concerned about the really poor state of internet in my area. I received in July a letter from 7 municipalities in Melbourne's south-east. Collectively, these councils govern $63 billion in economic impact in my city. And, Deputy Speaker, they wrote me the most extraordinary letter talking about a study that they have conducted in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, which shows that 85% of these businesses in this region, many of them are high-end manufacturing businesses that are struggling to convert to the old economy to the new economy, 85% of them are today relying on ADSL 2+, Deputy Speaker. Now, this is not the sort of infrastructure, this is not the sort of technology that is going to see us capture the jobs of the future that the Prime Minister speaks about so excitedly. There is a much broader economic impact, Deputy Speaker, and we talk about all of our electorates, but together they add up to Australia. And what we know is that this is the Snowy Mountain scheme of our age. This is the critical piece of infrastructure that we need to invest in to ensure that all of our children are going to be able to flourish in what will be a knowledge economy for developing countries. Now, our Shadow Minister, Deputy Speaker, made some really interesting points before, and one of them, if there's one thing that you take away from the words I say in the chamber today, Deputy Speaker, is that at the moment Australia is 44th in the world for internet speed, and we are currently in decline. Deputy Speaker, this puts us behind not just sort of bigger and more developed economies in Australia, but places like Romania, places like Russia, Deputy Speaker, places like Slovakia. So I say again that we can hear all of the exciting platitudes from the Prime Minister and the Treasurer, but when it comes to policy on the ground, we are not seeing the hard yards being done. Deputy Speaker, there are 3 quick points that I want to make about the performance of the Prime Minister when he was in the role as the Communications Minister. 3 enormous disappointments that all Australians should understand when they're beginning to make their assessment of the new Prime Minister. The first is, Deputy Speaker, the cost of the NBN. This person, who is now our Prime Minister, promised that this second-rate NBN would be built for $29.5 billion. He revised those assumptions about 6 months after he first made that statement, and then, Deputy Speaker, in more recent times he's revised the cost again to $56 billion. Now, this is a person who we're being led to believe talks a big game about his commercial background, but here we have a project that within a 2-year period he's essentially doubled the cost of. In terms of pace, Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister told us this would be delivered by 2016. That's clearly not going to happen because all of my electorate will have to be connected over the next year. We're now being told that it will take to 2020 to install this critical piece of infrastructure. And the final point, Deputy Speaker, I would point out is about the quality. Members on the other side need to really understand this. Copper and fibre are not the same thing. We heard the member for Solomon say, isn't it great we've been able to deliver at a lower cost and it's exactly the same product. Wrong, wrong, wrong. And what I find so frustrating about this, Deputy Speaker, is that we'll only get one chance to do this and we're messing up that chance because of this Prime Minister.
Time has expired. I thank the honourable member for Hotham and I call the honourable member for O'Connor.
Right.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, now I represent the electorate of O'Connor, which roughly covers 1/3 of regional West Australia. Now, I'm very proud of my state. We produce about 10% of the nation's GDP, but we do produce 55% of the country's mercantile exports. And a lot of those mercantile exports are produced in the very remote regions of my electorate. Now, if we can review where we were as regards to the NBN in September 2013, in my electorate of O'Connor, not one premises had been passed or was planned to be passed by the National Broadband Network. So, look, it's with great delight that I can report to the House today that we now have 6,238 premises that have access to the National Broadband Network. That is a remarkable turnaround in 2 years, and I congratulate the Minister, previous Minister for Communications, now Prime Minister Turnbull. It has been an extraordinary turnaround and one that I'm very proud to be part of. But not only have we got 6,900 premises which are currently able to connect to the NBN, over the next 3 years we'll have a further 49,640 premises across O'Connor who will be able to connect to the National Broadband Network. That includes the major regional cities of Kalgoorlie, where the build will commence in 2016, and the major city of Albany, where the build will begin in 2017. Now, this is critical infrastructure for a region that produces a lot of the nation's wealth. But the NBN, if I can digress for a moment, Mr. Speaker, the NBN is just one part of the communications jigsaw puzzle in my network, in my electorate. Of course, mobile telephone reception is another big part of that communications jigsaw puzzle. And I just want to mention the government's mobile phone black spot program. Now, under the previous government, while they were prepared to invest $43 billion in the National Broadband Network, which was fine, and I echo the former Treasurer's comments this morning that it's a good concept and a nation-building project that we needed. But within that time period, not one single dollar was spent on the mobile phone network. So the Communications Minister and his Parliamentary Secretary at the time, Paul Fletcher, had a program to cover mobile phone black spots, $100 million, not a great deal of money in the scheme of things compared to the National Broadband Network. But with some very good work by Parliamentary Secretary Fletcher at the time, he has managed to leverage in Western Australia $22 million of federal money into $58 million of investment in the mobile phone network, which has resulted in 60 new mobile phone towers in my electorate of O'Connor. So a fantastic result once again for the people of O'Connor. Now, as I became the new member for O'Connor and I set up my office and I started to have constituent inquiries come in, it became obvious very early that the people that were being serviced by the interim satellite service were very, very unhappy. So this was the interim satellite service set up under the previous NBN administration. They bought what they thought was capacity for 250,000 customers. By the time we got to 48,000 customers, the capacity was all but used up, and the speed had slowed down to, in some cases, worse than dial-up. I've had a consistent and ongoing problem with this satellite service, and I'm very, very pleased to say that the launch of the new satellite Sky Muster 1 the other day, 2 weeks ago now, is great news for my electorate. I have 2,300 people on the interim satellite service. O'Connor has the largest number of people on the interim satellite service, and it's great news that the satellite is up. It is being commissioned, and as of February next year, people will be able to transition onto that new satellite service. So that's great news that I can now pass back to the constituents in my electorate. Not only will the 2,300 who are on the interim satellite service benefit, but estimated up to 5,000 to 7,000 other people will access the satellite service when it's available. Now, the last thing I wanted to say was we've heard a lot of criticism about the fibre to the node technology mix that the government's promoting. Now, I have heard of speeds up to 90 megabits per second being achieved under the satellite to the node system, but surely, and as a farmer myself and someone who often has capital projects where you can strain by capital and time, you build a project that you can then add on to. Now, surely, if we build a fibre to the node at some later stage in the future, we can expand and improve that program as technology moves on. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank the honourable member for O'Connor. The discussion has concluded.